What's up, Jennifer? Welcome to the Dad Edge podcast. Man, I'm excited to have you.
I am so excited to be here, Larry. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, you've got a quite a fascinating book, which is Never Enough When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About It. How did you even start to think about this as a topic? Like, was there a defining moment where you're like, I need to write more about this or research more about this?
2019, three things were happening in my life. The first one was my oldest son, William, was going into high school. And it hit me that I had 4 years left to really instill everything that I wanted to into him before he, would leave and go off to college or whatever he was going to do. And also in 2019, I was writing an article for the Washington Post about how students attending what researchers call high achieving schools, those are competitive public and private schools around the country, those kids were now officially an at-risk group, meaning they were 2 to 6 times more likely to suffer from clinical levels of anxiety and depression and substance abuse disorder than the average American teen. And my kids go to these competitive schools. And so I wanted to know what I could do in my own home to buffer against that excessive pressure.
Wow. So, I mean, you remember the year and everything that, yeah. And there is something about that aha moment when your kids enter high school. I've got two of them in high school, two out of the four. And it's like, wow, we're on the 4 year countdown right now.
Mhm.
And this is like the last stretch this is like the home stretch as far as like them being under our roof and impact and all this stuff. As far as I'm just curious, I think the story I'm telling myself is you and I are probably right around the same age. So I think that parents in particular, number one, I think parents are prone anyway to want to see their children achieve. And I think we see this at like youth athletics. Like I actually just did a Instagram reel just a couple of days ago because I was at my 9 year old's flag football practice. And this dad next to me was just like berating his kid. This was practice. And this is not even a team. This is learn to play. Like I'm talking like recreation of recreation, right? This is learn to play. This is like, hey, this is how you throw a pass. This is how you run a slant. This is how you catch the ball while you're running. And then they scrimmage and they have fun. It's meant to be fun and recreational. And this guy was like just badgering his kid, run faster, turn around, open your arms up, look where you're going. And like basically not letting the coaches do their job. And I was just like looking at this guy like, dude, you are actually doing your child like the worst possible service. You think you're helping, but you're hurting, right? But I think parents in general, we want our kids to succeed. And I think you and I probably came from a generation where we felt that. But the story that I tell myself is that the pressure is even higher now because of social media and things that people see. And all you have to do is open your phone and you see somebody else's kid who's like 9 years old and they're just like running routes and they're sprinting and they're doing all this stuff and they're a gifted athlete. And I don't know if that's the comparison trap or what's going on, but I would love to hear your take on that.
So I was noticing too that my kids' childhoods were so different from
Yeah.
mine. I grew up in the 70s and early 80s. And so I interviewed economists and historians to try to get to the root of this achievement culture. And it's interesting. I found a few things that were different from our childhood versus our kids' childhoods. But the story that resonated the most with me was the economic story. So, what I mean by that is when we were growing up in the 70s and early 80s, life was generally more affordable. Housing was more affordable, healthcare was more affordable, higher education was more affordable, food was more affordable. There was more slack in the system. So, our parents could be more hands off because they were relatively assured that even with some failures, some bad grades, that we'd be able to replicate our childhoods, if not do even better than our own parents did. I mean, that's the American dream, right? To at least be able to replicate your childhood, if not do even better. But modern parents today are seeing, you know, a group, millennials, who are not doing as well as their parents. They are feeling the crush of the middle class. They are seeing the steep inequity that's come in over the last several decades, a real divide between the haves and the have nots. And, from my perspective, I think parents have bet big that early childhood success is the best way to protect our kids in an uncertain future. And so, a lot of parents talk about the importance of getting into a good college. And I think what parents are doing is they are looking at a good college, or any college really, as a kind of life vest in a sea of economic uncertainty. So we don't know what 50% of the jobs are going to be like. We don't know, now AI is on the scene and climate change is an issue. So where does that leave our kids? We don't know. But parents are hoping that that safety vest of a college will keep their kids afloat. But unfortunately, what we're seeing in the research that I was just talking about, that this is a newly named at-risk group, but also, just I found in my reporting traveling around the country that safety vest is becoming really a leaded vest and drowning too many of the kids that we're trying to protect.
Wow. I feel that, right? But I feel it in two different areas, right? Where I feel it where, my own childhood. So I get what you're saying, but I also, as a parent, I don't buy into it anymore because of all the work that I've been doing on this platform is that, an incredible college, will get you everything that you possibly want in life, right? Getting into a good college means everything. I used to think that years and years, probably a decade ago, like, well, this is, what success is really all about. I don't really buy into that anymore. Your data actually suggests that it's actually higher pressure, and we're actually seeing higher levels of anxiety and depression among, students who attend schools that are harder to get into.
Yes, there is something about the excessive pressure in these environments, and really, if you were to sort of break it down, it's that factors that are supposed to protect children and mental health: strong relationships with peers, strong relationships with parents, strong relationships with teachers and coaches. Those protective factors in these highly competitive environments actually become additional pressures. So we're removing the buffers that relationships used to be, and these relationships are becoming extra pressures. What I mean by that is kids feel like they have to outcompete their peers for, a shot in the, advanced class, or, a spot at college, or a spot on the A team. And yes, competition has always been a part of childhood, but it feels as though competition has gotten greater, and the supports around us to deal with that sort of competitive environment, those buffers have gone away. And so it's making our kids more at risk.
Wow. That doesn't really surprise me. I went to an all boys Catholic college prep. It was tough to get into, and I literally got in on a whim. It was kind of funny. I really didn't have the grades, and we didn't have the money. And I'll never forget, I had to apply for student aid and grant and work study and all that stuff, which I got, and it paid for my tuition. But I'll never forget, I literally think this was the thing that got me in that school. The dean of the school wanted to interview me, and he sat down and asked me a bunch of questions. And he's like, "So, well, let me ask you this." He's like, "Well, where are you going to go if you don't get in this school?" And I was in eighth grade. I was 13 years old. And I looked at this guy and I go, "I don't have a backup plan. This is where I'm going to school." And he just like looked at me and like kind of like cocked his head. And he's like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah, really." I was like, "I want to go here. I don't want to go to school, period." And I really did mean that with everything I had. I mean, of course, I would have had to attend the public school that was down the street from me, but we did not live in a good neighborhood, and the public school was a mess, and I did not want to go. And I was just like, this is where I want to go. And that got me in there. But I will tell you, there was tons of pressure, right? Lots of pressure to do well in school, to do well in sports. I mean, the bar was set very, very high. And what I can tell you is that I think some of us responded well to that pressure and some of us didn't. But the other thing too is if I fast forward the tape, 25 years after I graduated high school, I see pressures now, even in the public school system, that's even greater than I ever experienced, right? Even in like these these high pressure environments that we had. And I do think social media has had a lot to do with it, but I also think like parents, right? We don't know, we don't know. I know in your book you talk about the importance of parent resilience, right? And how important our resilience as parents is to our kids' mental health. And I am just fascinated for you to talk us through that.
Yeah. So this really surprised me. I, when you look at decades worth of resilience research, there is one intervention that stands out as the most important intervention for any child in distress. And that is to make sure that that child's primary caregivers, the mother, the father, the grandmother, that their well-being, their support system is intact, because a child's resilience rests fundamentally on the resilience of the adults in that child's life. And adult resilience rests on the depth and support of their relationships. So, we are sold a bill of goods by the wellness industry that says, download this meditation app, drink this tea, go out for a workout, and you'll be resilient. Yes, those are great stress reducers. Sleep, we need that. But it is not going to make us resilient, the resilience we need to be the first responders to our kids' everyday struggles. And the only way that we can be that is through relationships. So we need one or two or three people in our lives who know us, who we can be vulnerable to, who can be vulnerable to us, and who can see us for who we are deep at our core and love us unconditionally, the way we are trying to be for our own children. And, I asked the researchers, does marriage count? Does a partner count? And they unequivocally said no, that relationships and marriages are already overburdened. We are burdened being these, one family villages trying to be everything to our kids, that we really need the support of people outside of our home holding us up. So it is not put on your oxygen mask first kind of advice. It goes deeper than that. What I'm saying is, have one or two or three people in your life who can see you struggling, who can see you gasping for air, and have them close enough to you that they can put that mask on for you. So it's a different kind of relationship. It's a relationship where, you can really be fully seen and known. And there are lots of reasons in our culture that we don't have those relationships. We talked about it a little earlier, like we are a very hyper individualistic culture. And I think dads in particular have been socialized to think that they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. By the way, have you ever tried to do that? It's literally impossible. You literally cannot pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. I don't even know how it became a thing. So we need people in our lives that we can lean on for support, and who others can lean on us, so that we have this healthy interdependence. That
Mhm.
is what I saw among the families of the healthy strivers that I interviewed. Their parents did not try to go it alone. Their parents had the resilience of deep friendship.
So I disagree with everything you're saying because I think the lone wolf is strong, right? No.
No,
I agree with everything you're saying. I'm totally kidding.
I knew you were,
I
because I was like, "There's no way. I've been following you. There's
no. I live this, right? I really do. We have a group coaching environment called the Dad Edge Alliance Mastermind Community, right? We've been doing this now since 2016. You just put several pieces together for me, and you actually took it a much deeper step forward than I ever even thought about it.
no."
So, like I've been saying since 2016, because I joined my first, Iron Sharpens Iron group coaching environment as a participant in 2015. I'll never forget stepping into that, because I was like, well, if I need people, then I'm weak, right? Or if I want to go at this alone. That's what strong people do. They don't ask for help. And I struggled for so long, like so long. I keep thinking back, like I would ask my wife, I'm like, college was like the time of my life. Like, I don't understand like why that isn't the same now, but I really put the pieces together now. In college, we were all in the same boat as students, right? And we all had this circle of friends that when you were down or I was down or whatever, we would build each other back up again, right? We would help each other out. We were like a pack, right? Versus like no one that I really knew in college, like went at life like completely solo and they were in their own world. I mean, a few people, but they were weird. And, but, I joined my first mastermind in 2015. And about a month into it, I was like, oh my God, like, this is literally the missing link in my life. Like, to do life with these guys, like, this is unreal. But the step that you took that I never thought of. So I have two older boys, and I'm not saying this to brag because I've been literally scratching my head being like, how did this work out the way it did? I don't understand. My two older boys, right? They're far from perfect. They're 17 and 15, right? But these two boys, man, like, they are so strong mentally and physically and emotionally. Like, they're very resilient individuals. And I'm like, how'd y'all, like, I even asked my 15-year-old, I was like, dude, I was like, let me in on on what's going on for you. I was like, because I see your friends, like, they're into like bad things, man. Like, what, not friends anymore, but like your circle of friends you used to hang out with, they're into bad stuff, man. Like, they're doing this, they're into weed, they're into drinking, they're into this. Like, you're in the gym, you're training, you're on the football team, you're a starter on offense and defense, and there you have blinders on of like, this is what I'm doing and this is where I'm going, no holds barred. I was like, how? Like, why? Why do you make these decisions? And he's like, I don't know. It's just, he goes, it's what we do. I was like,
Mhm.
what do you mean? He's like, it's what we do as a family. It's like, this is what we stand for. And I'm like, I get that. I was like, but here's the thing. Ever since he was little, I mean, I've had a circle of people for the majority of his life that I can go lean on when I need to so I can be stronger for them. But I never quite looked at it like that. I'm like, well, I just need to be strong because I just need to be a better leader. Right. But I never thought that there was like this contagious element that was going on until you shine the light on that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I would love to. So, with interdependence, you come to realize that you interrupt the cycle of generosity that binds us to people when you don't accept help, when you don't reach out. Then they can't be the helper. Then they can't feel good about themselves and a valued part of their community. So your job is really both to lean on people and to be someone that others can lean on too in healthy
Yep.
ways. I wrote an article for the Washington Post, an opinion piece about teaching kids the skills of interdependence. And it's really teaching them, a for other mindset. You mentioned that you went to a Catholic school. I feature a Catholic school, a Jesuit school in my book, and their motto is not better than others, but better for others. And to
Oh,
me,
wow.
that, right? Isn't that powerful? That is
Yeah.
what I have tried to do in my own home. And I think, to the dads listening, I have spoken with Scott Galloway and Lisa Damore, who's a child psychologist, about the importance of fathers leading this work. Because if we leave the work of talking about our emotional lives, our emotional needs, our psychological needs to the women in our life, it just further entrenches the idea that this is women's work. So to have the men in your children's lives showing up, communicating, modeling, but also being explicit about what they're doing. So in our house, we are very explicit. We have a motto that I adopted from Ned Hallowell, and my husband has adopted it too. And the motto is don't worry alone. So
Hmm.
that is true as an adult, and it is true for our kids that what we don't want is to ever worry alone. Because what you really need to do, relationships, deep relationships, act like a kind of shock absorber to the ups and downs of life. And for our kids to know that, to know, like when my husband was going through something at work, his friends would come over, they'd sit in the living room, with the door open, and my kids would hear him asking for advice. How would you handle this? What do you think is going on? And, when he, that, so we are very deliberate in our homes about living our lives out loud within, an appropriate amount. We
Sure.
are not burdening our kids, but we are simply saying we are not meant to go through this life alone. We are interdependent, and it's how we thrive. So that is something that at every turn in our family we try to emphasize. And it's really, my husband has really leaned into that role to model for our boys. I'll give you a little example. Before I started
Yeah.
understanding this, I raised my boys and my daughter with very similar skills. We talk about emotions, we talk about everything. And my older son was in third grade going on a farm trip with his class, and it was his first time away from home. And he said, Mom, I'm really nervous about going. And I said, you know what? You, and I'm sure 2/3 of your class are worried. Why don't you be the first one to open up and say, is anybody else like feeling, ah? And he's like, Mom, you make a great girl, but you'd make a horrible boy. Boys do not talk about that. We don't talk about those things. Boys make friends by being brave. And yes, I think that's true. I think we all have to be brave. We all have to believe in ourselves. But really, relationships are stronger when we can rely on people, and we can be that person that someone else can rely on.
I love that. You know, I'm very deep in my faith, and I had a good friend of mine who's also he's also our priest, but we're the same age, and he went to college with one of my buddies, so like we'll go and grab coffee and that kind of thing. And we were talking about this concept. You know, even my shirt says "Iron sharpens iron." It's one of our shirts, and I was wearing it when we went to coffee, and he's like, I like your shirt. He's like, Jesus had the same approach. I was like, he did? He's like, yeah, he had his band of brothers. There were 12 apostles. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is so true. And if you watch, like, so for instance, the series The Chosen, right? Those guys, like, you read the Bible and you're like, oh, these guys must have knew what was going on all along. They were probably really relaxed. They were just going along, but they were just like, I don't know what's going on to you. Like they were like confused, uncertain. They didn't know what was going to happen. They were afraid, but they were there to sharpen each other. I'm curious just your opinion before we get to, because I'm really excited to talk about mattering. Where do you think we went wrong with this? Because if you really look at, you know, times that have passed, right? There were villages, there were cultures where families all like came together to raise a community together, right? And I don't know exactly when it happened or why it happened, but suddenly we, especially men, we really started going at life alone.
Yeah.
And we thought that that was the way to do it. And actually, we would look at the other way of doing it. Well, if I need help, then that's just wrong. That's weak. That's broken, right? And I'm curious to know. I don't even know when that happened, but it did happen at some point.
It did happen. There's a great, very dense, but very good book by the sociologist Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone. And he chronicled how men used to have bowling leagues and,
Yeah,
poker clubs, or, the Lions Club, or places that they would gather. There were neighbors who knew each other, who relied on each other. And and also, by the way, religion, right? Religion used to be a place that would, gather people together, gather community. When someone was going through something hard, it was the church that would show up. It was the church members who would bring the food. And I think as we've become a more secular society, a few things I think are happening. We've become more secular. People are not going to religious institutions. So things that used to bring them together, which was a very natural place, and a place where people could feel relied on, and to know that you had people there that you could rely on. That's for many people in America, that's gone away. We're also really not investing in our neighborhoods anymore. We are, very nomadic. We are picking up and going for the next job opportunity. And so those critical relationships that we used to have in our neighborhoods, when I was growing up, we all knew each other. When somebody went away, somebody fed the goldfish or picked up the newspaper or the mail so that it didn't look like no one was at home. So we kept an eye on each other. But now there's some stats, something like 2/3 of Americans don't even know their neighbors. So, I think
2/3.
I have to check that
I
stat. It
it
was
wouldn't surprise me, but I'm
very
like,
low,
wow, that. But
very
I wouldn't.
big
It wouldn't
stat.
surprise me.
So we've, all of these sort of these natural places where we gathered as a community, um, we no longer have those opportunities, and it's wearing on us. It's wearing on us. We cannot be one family villages. We need to start revillaging. And that's what I'm trying to do, by explaining. You talked about mattering is, to me, sort of how we can go about revillaging our communities. So I'll tell you how I got to it. uh,
Please.
in the book, I went in search of the kids who were thriving despite the pressures in their environment. I wanted to know what, if anything, they had in common. What was home life like? What did their parents focus on at home? What was school like? What were their relationships like with their peers? And I found about 14 or so things that these healthy strivers, as I call them, had in common. And I outline it all in the book, but it boiled down to this idea that these kids who were thriving in these environments had a high level of what psychologists call mattering. Mattering is the idea of feeling valued for who we are deep at our core, by our family, by our friends, by our communities, and also mattering. That's 50% of it. And the other 50% is that these kids were relied on, they were depended on to add value back to their families,
Hmm.
to their friends, to their communities. So this feeling valued and adding value, it created this upward spiral, this positive upward spiral that acted like a kind of protective shield. It didn't mean that these healthy strivers didn't have setbacks or failures. They certainly were down sometimes and anxious. But what mattering did, it acted like a buoy that would lift them up. It made them resilient. And researchers have been studying it since the 1980s, but it's been locked away in the ivory tower. And I think you might find this interesting, that researchers who study it say that after the human drive for food and shelter, it is the instinct to matter that drives human behavior, for better and for worse. So when we feel like we matter, we show up to the world in positive ways. We want to perform, we want to achieve, we want to make things better for others, we want to be good neighbors. When we don't feel like we matter, we can either turn inward and get anxious and depressed, and turn to substances to sort of alleviate the pain temporarily, or we can act out. We can act in angry ways that force others to take notice of us. Oh, you don't think I matter? I'll show you I matter. So that, to me, is so compelling. And mattering matters throughout the lifespan. It matters a lot in adolescence, when our kids are developing a sense of self. And the reason that I call some of our achievement culture toxic, it becomes toxic when our value, our sense of worth, is tangled up in our achievements, so
Yeah.
that we only feel like we matter when. So the kids I met who were struggling the most felt like their mattering, their worth, their value was contingent on their performance. The other kids who were struggling, and this kind of surprised me, were kids who felt like they mattered at home. Their parents told them they mattered, but they were never relied on or depended on to add meaningful value back to anyone other than themselves. And so, what these kids lacked was social proof that they mattered.
Can you? This is really deep. First of all, I love this. I'm so thankful you did the research on this, because this is something that I've in 1,100 episodes of this podcast, I've never talked about this topic. So I can see where parents and kids definitely get really tripped up in, like, well, you're only as good as your last report card, or, and not that we say that kind of stuff, right? But that could be the message, right? Or you're only as good as the last performance on the football field, or in your dance competition, or whatever else, right? And every time I tell my kids that I'm proud of them, like especially my teenagers, would be like, why? And I'd be like, well, you don't have to achieve a certain GPA for me to be proud of you. You don't have to, you don't have to achieve a certain thing on the football field for me to be proud of you. I'm proud of the person that you are, who you're becoming, the things that you value, how you live your life. And it's easier, I think, to do that, at least from my perspective, uh, with teenagers, because it's more conversational. Where I struggle, and I would really value your opinion, I think a lot of other men who listen to the show, is how do you do that with little kids,
Yeah.
like 9-year olds, 7-year olds, 5-year olds, right? To get them to feel like they matter, like what they're contributing to the family.
Yeah. So, yeah, it is hard. It's tricky. So I have a few pieces of advice. The main one is what I say in the book is to get a PhD in your kid. So one of the researchers I interviewed said to me, the self becomes stronger less by being praised than by being known. So, who is your child deep at their core? Sometimes for parents, it's very hard because we know our kids, and it's just so much a part of who we are that it's hard to kind of pull out their strengths and notice them. And so, there's actually something called the VIA survey, VIA survey. It stands for Values in Action. It's a free online survey. Takes about 10 or 12 minutes to fill out. There's a version for adults and for kids. It's a scientifically validated survey that was created by the two leading positive psychology researchers, Marty Seligman and Christopher Peterson. They're kind of the grandfathers of positive psychology. And what's so cool about the survey, and again, it's free, is that you can see your five top strengths and you can see your child's five top strengths, and then you can start noticing them. So, with my kids, I've started to take their report cards, and their teachers do, they get a grade, but then it's also annotated. They also get like a narrative summary of how they are in the classroom. And teachers are generally very good at noticing our kids' strengths. And so I've taken to annotating the report card and underline or highlight, the positive attributes. And I'll say, oh my gosh, I see this too. Or you're just like this at home. How wonderful that you're like this in class. I also say to my kids, take note of what other people in our lives say about them. We have like you were talking about your group. We have a group of several friends, family friends, who are, I think of it in terms of like, who can I replicate? How can I replicate myself in my kids' lives? And these families can, of course, they can't take the place of a mother, but they're people
Sure.
that my kids know they can turn to for advice, that they can say anything to. Nothing is off limit to these families. I said to them explicitly, anything happening in our home, you can say to these families, we don't have secrets. And what these families do is they point out my kids' strengths. Like one dad said to my older son, you have such a good work ethic. Oh my God, I'm so impressed by you. And so it's important for them to hear about their strengths from people other than their parents too.
Yeah.
Another thing you can do with young kids, something that I do, um, ever since I heard that phrase, "the self becomes stronger less by being praised than by being known," is we go around on holiday on birthdays really, and we say one thing we love about the birthday girl or boy, and it's never about achievement. Oh, you scored on the soccer team. It's you are such a good teammate, or you always put your homework down when I'm struggling. Thank you for being so generous. Or so having their siblings really point out their core strengths, things that are deep inside of them. It's a great way of helping them develop pride for who they are.
We do this thing every now and again. I would say probably once every few months or so when we're having dinner is we'll do a praise chart where we, and it's exactly that. It's like not necessarily achievements, but it's we, for the six of us, right? It's mom, dad, Ethan, Mason, Lawson, Colton, and then everybody gets a post-it note, right? And everybody has a square. And then what your job is you have to write down something that you want to acknowledge and appreciate about the other person, right? That maybe it's something you saw, something that's impacted you, something that you want to say that you've never said or haven't said for quite some time. And it's amazing like you sit back and you watch the dinner table just come to life. And when you have my 15-year-old tell my 9-year-old, hey Lawson, like I just really appreciated last week when I was not feeling well and you came downstairs and you brought me a glass of water. It just made my day. And then you see like my 9-year-old just like come to life, right? And then you see my 15-year-old who is because one of the things you're talking about too is also not only taking but also contributing, right? And this is how we sharpen each other and mattering and all these things. And you see my 15-year-old, like as he's saying these things, like the fact that he's reflecting and contributing to something to his life, you could tell it's impactful to him, right? And I think that that's so important. But I love the fact that you bring other people into this. I want to ask you though, as far as I would imagine, I know for us, we're kind of cautious, right, about people that we bring around, right? People that we hang out with, people that we do life with. I've even gone to the extent of, when I host men's retreats, which I've done this in the past, like where you take, a group of 10, 15 guys to Colorado, we rent out an Airbnb and we take them through masterminding and hikes and all this other stuff. And I bring my boys with me and they're like, why are you bringing us? And I was like, well, number one, Denver's beautiful, right? Breckenridge is beautiful. But number two, I always tell them, I was like, the most important thing that I want you to see is what a true friendship is all about, what iron sharpen iron friendship is all about, what deep respect for other men and how we elevate each other, and what good conversation really looks like, versus like, how's your day? How's life? How are the kids? How's work? Right? It's more like we are really in each other's lives. And I want you to see that. I think my kids have really gotten a bird's eye view of those relationships. And I think that's probably one of the reasons they don't tolerate, knuckleheads in their life, probably. But as far as mattering goes, um, I would love for you to share, um, how can we do a better job of this in marriage?
Yeah. So appreciation, gratitude. Often we get, and I'm certainly a victim of this, we get so distracted in our everyday lives with the to-do list and all we have to do. And sometimes we can focus too much on what our significant other is lacking, like picking up socks, than all of the things that they do every day to make your life better. And
Yeah.
so I think for marriage, they say gratitude acts like a booster shot. I've been together with my husband now 23 years, married 19, because you helped me with the math. I couldn't remember how many years we were married. Um, and gratitude is that, but it's not just saying thank you for cleaning. My husband often does a lot of the tasks that I don't feel like doing, like emptying out the refrigerator or going grocery shopping or also cooking the meal, which he does all the time. He's the cook. And so I'll say things like, instead of thank you so much for cleaning out the refrigerator, I'll say thank you for being the kind of person who takes care of me, knows what I hate, and does the tasks that I don't want to do. You are so generous. You are such a good life partner. So it's less about the deed and more about
Yeah.
the doer.
Yeah. It's more about the person. As you said that, just for like a moment, I put myself in your shoes as your husband and what those words would mean to me, because, three basic needs of men is to feel respected, appreciated, validated. Right. And when you feel appreciated, like it goes so far, like for us, and not just because like, hey, you did the thing. Like when my wife, she did this thing one time, and I think men are stereotypically, we're known for like, oh, all they want is sex and that's how they are loved and they're just sexual beings. And that is insanely false. Yes, we love sex, great, but I will tell you, and I think any man would agree with me, is that when my wife comes up to me and she like literally holds me above my face and she looks me in the eyes and she's like, I just want to thank you so much for working so hard
Mm.
for us and for what we have and for the family that we have, and that I can stay home with these boys and I don't have to worry about working. Just thank you so much for working so hard. It means the world to me that we get to live this way, and live the life that we do, and it's all because of your hard work. And I'm like, I literally feel like she just like lassoed the moon and brought it down. I'm like, that's like the most meaningful thing in the world, for us. And I think that that's missed a lot. And I think a lot of it too is it's not necessarily like missed because we want to miss it. I think we just sort of just get it. It's like you were saying, it's like all the to-dos, it's all the things, it's all the busyness. Like we never stop and say, hey, wait a second. Let me just acknowledge and appreciate you for a few things. Like my wife just left town. She was gone for 4 days. And when she came home, I was like, I just really appreciate you 10x now, because like trying to balance work and getting 4 boys everywhere and making sure everybody ate a meal and they're still living and all these other things, like it was a lot. Like I can definitely understand like your job a lot more now. So I think that's great. I want to make sure as we wrap up here, is there anything else that you wanted to share, a point you wanted to hit home that maybe we didn't hit hard enough, or just something that was left unsaid?
I am just so grateful that you have these conversations. I think, the time has come for dads to be enjoyed for the full people that they are. And I think, the media, even research on fathers has been so lacking. And boy, are dads critically important for the mental health and well being of their kids and their partner's well being and mental health. So I think we all have to, you know, keep helping each other be resilient and don't worry alone.
I love that. I think we're just better as a team, to be honest. Just to kind of really hit this home, I think a lot of guys like love football, right? And stereotypically, I never loved football until I like it, but I never loved it like I do. My 15-year-old plays, and um, he's been playing since the third grade. And I was like, dude, I was like, the quarterback in this and the receiver's that. He goes, Dad, he goes, you and every other fan miss everything when it comes to football. I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, the game is actually played on the line. Like that quarterback can't get a pass off or a handoff on unless we're doing our job. It's a team. It's not Tom Brady is not out there winning Super Bowls by himself. And I was like, you little devil. Like, you are so right, man. You're so right. Like the teenager schooling the pops, that's what he does. But I was like, that is insanely true. And my 15-year-old's on, he's a center. So he's on that line. He's like, if we're not doing our job, nothing gets done. He's like, it's team, right? And plus, like, we can still do our job, have a terrible quarterback, and the job won't get done. So it all works together. It's a team approach. And I think that's a really solid reminder for parents, not just men, but women too. Get entrenched in deeper relationships where you're not having these surface level conversations, where you can lean into times where you're in a valley, and vice versa, where you can contribute, like you were saying. I want to, as we wrap up here, I want to make sure everyone listening to you, that they follow you, that they really get entrenched in the work you're doing, that they can find your book and all the other resources you have.
So you can find me at jenniferbwallace.com or on Instagram at jbrehenneywallace. And the book is Never Enough: When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About It.
I love that. Well, guys, you're not going to have to look far for Jennifer. You can head on over to thedadedge.com/446 for the show. We're going to have a link for her book, as well as her Instagram. And here's what I ask you guys to do. Go follow Jennifer on Instagram. And if there was something that was super meaningful that she shared today, please give her some acknowledgement and appreciation of what that was. Just go send her a message over on Instagram. Let her know that she had an impact on your life. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on today. This was like, I literally feel like a breath of fresh air. You mentioned the oxygen mask. I feel like I had O2 on steroids today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. This was great.
You bet. Gentlemen, like I said, head on over to thedadedge.com/446 for this show. We'll have all the links in there for you. And go out, live legendary, and don't do life alone. Take care.